Hi there, and welcome to a special edition of Self-Inflicted Aural Nostalgia, the Guided by Voices podcast. My name is Jeff Gomez, and I recently spoke with Matthew Cutter, author of the new book, Closer You Are, the story of Robert Pollard and Guided by Voices. Matthew and I had a wide-ranging discussion talking about Pollard, GBV, and how he came to write his book. Closer You Are is published in hardcover by Da Capo Press and comes out on August 21st. It's going to be essential reading for any Guided by Voices fan. Here's our talk. Okay, so I am sitting here talking to Matthew Cutter, the author of the Robert Pollard biography, The Closer You Are. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
So let me go right to the beginning and sort of ask, how did you get into GBV? They're certainly a cult band. When did you hear of them? What was that first thing that made you get into them?
I was living in Boulder, Colorado in the 90s, and it was 1997 when I was in the local CD store up on the hill, not Albums on the Hill, but another CD store up there that doesn't exist anymore. And I heard some music playing through the speakers. It was, I believe it was Bulldog Skin. And then by the time I Am a Tree came on, I went over to the front desk and said, "Who is this? I need to know what this is. I need it right now."
Cool.
Okay, well, here's your mag earwig.
Nice. And then how after that did you see them live? I'm sure you've seen them.
I've seen them a bunch of times. I actually didn't see them live until I think it was 2001 or 2002. I saw them at the Record Theater in Baltimore.
Okay.
Much later. But at that time, it was something about Mag Earwig. The record has no pictures of anyone's faces in it.
Yeah.
You know, it says their names. There's all these little mysterious bits of lyrics in parentheses after the ends of songs, kind of explaining and adding new dimensions to them. And just the mystery of it just caught me. I had to know, I wanted to hear more of their music. So I went back and bought Alien Lanes next and a bunch more records. But it was the mystery of it, I think, that really drew me in.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like a lot of groups, especially Bob's from the 70s, they were always on the cover. I mean, as much as I love David Bowie, his face is on every record except, I think,
Right.
the last one.
Right. And this kind of telegraphed to me that the music was more important than the people making it to themselves. At least
Yeah.
they felt that way about it.
No, that's a good point. And so you yourself have a band, right? Joseph Airport.
I do. I'm in the band Joseph Airport, and I'm also in the band Rectangle Creep.
Now, that's your brother? Who's Patrick Cutter?
Patrick's actually my son. He's 13.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. He's 13. He's a budding musician. He loves Bob's music. I think he's more keyed into the lyrics than I am at this point. And he writes his own lyrics and sings his own melodies, and we argue like the Oasis brothers in the studio. And
I love that. I thought you actually had a Jim Robert Pollard thing going on, but it's a father-son. That's even better.
Close. Yeah. But it's fun.
And then, so your band, Joseph Airport, I think you guys all met at Heat Fest. How'd you get together?
We did. We all met in Dayton. It was kind of, surrounding Heat Fests and other visits to Dayton, because I just kind of became friends with those guys and would visit at non-Heat Fest times. And sometimes, those are the guys who work at Rockathon Records as well, making the T-shirts. And Joe Patterson in Joseph Airport works with Bob on the design for his records and does all the design for the Eat magazines. So, sometimes we would go hang out with Bob, but most of the time the goal was just to hang out in Dayton, do our thing, play some music.
And so how did you, you're firmly in the inner core there of the group. How did you sort of crack that? Did you just approach Bob at a show, or how'd you get to know these guys?
It wasn't even, it wasn't a matter of cracking it so much as, it was going to a Heat Fest in Dayton, I think, was the first time I met Bob. I remember, going to Boston Spaceships shows in the mid-aughts, and we saw Bob standing backstage. There was nothing there but, a little partition. But we were so just amazed that there was Bob Pollard 15 feet from us. We couldn't even go talk to him. We were paralyzed. So we saved all of our praise for Rich Turiel when he came out. But going to Heat Fest, I just met Bob briefly at Heat Fest. I think he he's got a really great memory, as you know. It's great memory for faces and names, and I think he just has a deep amount of gratitude for people who love his music. He's happy when his music touches people. And so I'd spoken to him a couple times at Heat Fest. I was going to say he probably knew my face because I'm freakishly tall and my head kind of sticks out the top of the crowd at shows. And then I think it was maybe 2011, there was a St. Patrick's Day show in Dayton that GBV played, or St. Patrick's Day Eve. And the next day, my friends were texting me saying, you should go to Wings today, hang out, go to Wings. And I was thinking, I don't know, maybe I should just drive home. And then someone said, no, we're going to Wings. We're going to hang out with Bob and watch March Madness this afternoon.
Wow.
And my mind was just blown. It's like, I can't, what, really? Sure, I'll do that. And he knew me better than I knew him when I walked in. I felt like that. He immediately turned around and said, "Hey, Matt," and he knew who I was, and I was amazed that he remembered me from our few meetings. And he's just a super great guy, really super nice guy.
It's funny. I've never personally met him, but I've just, on the Guided by Voices Facebook page, like there's just been so many stories of people who have met him and just what a gracious, sweet guy that he is.
He really is. He's a complicated guy and a complex guy, like most human beings are.
Sure.
But his persona when you meet him in person is quite different from the persona that he takes on stage. His
Sure.
Uncle Bob, complete Dean Martin performer with a drink and a cigarette in his hand, telling jokes and singing songs and
hey kids
doing this. That's right. Exactly.
So then how did you come to write this book? So you get to know him, you know him as a person a bit. You're obviously a fan. When do you get the germ of the idea to say, you know what, I want to actually write about him?
Well, I wanted to be a writer since I was in 7th grade. And I had worked as a writer and an editor at an association here in D.C. for about 13 years before all this came about. And Bob became interested in Joseph Airport. We gave him some of our music, as a joke. We totally thought, let's just see what he thinks about it. We printed up our lyrics and, we signed the lyric sheet and wrote one of one on it and gave all of this to him. And a couple of weeks later, we heard back from him, and it was just, kind of knocked us over to hear it, but he really liked what we had done.
Wow. And
wanted to put it out on Rockathon Records. So,
which is crazy, because I think is that the only band that he's put out that's not, the Takeovers or one of his own things?
Not the only one. Back in the early 2000s, they started doing some other records. I believe they did a band called Herschel Savage and the American Flag.
Oh, okay.
And I want to say Nash 84 is the name of the band, but there's 2 or 3 others, but ours was the first in, 12, 13 years on Rockathon. That wasn't strictly a Pollard release.
Wow.
But he selected the songs, sequenced the album, gave us a collage to be the cover of the album, and really just, he discovered us and has been our mentor, our rock mentor.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So that's on the music side of things, and then you've got your writing background, your writing drive. When do you sort of put those two things together?
To be completely honest with you, I still do not recall the moment of asking Bob if I could write his book.
Uh-huh.
But I know that my friend Jeremy was there. I know we were at Wings Sports Bar, and I know it was sometime in the afternoon of a lot of drinking. And I think that I had to be, sort of a little hammered before I could get the balls to ask that question.
Sure.
And then the next I heard from Bob was, he had thought about it for a few months and said, okay, let's come up with your pitch and we'll see what we think about it.
Uh-huh.
And Joseph Airport actually opened for Guided by Voices one time.
Wow.
We opened for them at the Pyramid Scheme in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And before the show, I sat on a couch. It was a red couch backstage, and Bob was just to my left, and Greg Demos was on the other side of him. And I said, okay, here's my pitch. I don't want to write a book about Guided by Voices. I want to write the authorized biography of Robert Ellsworth Pollard Jr. And in the course of telling that story of your life, of course, we're going to tell everything that needs to be told about Guided by Voices. But the frame of it is it's the story of your life. It's a life in rock, a life that was aimed toward rock, 20 years before he ever got a chance to do it for real.
Uh-huh. And then so that's the pitch. What was his reaction to that? What's the look on his face? What are the words that came out of his mouth? And then, of course, Greg Demos, the lawyer, and he's there to advise.
Right. He kind of looked down and listened to what I was saying, and then he was quiet for a second and looked down, and then looked up and he was thinking about it, and he looked over at Greg and said, "What do you think?" And Greg was like, "Sounds good."
Nice.
He looked back at me and said, "All right. Sounds good. You got it. Let's do it."
So he's, like you said, he's a big challenge. He's been around for a number of years. He's released a lot of music. He's a very complex character. How did you approach this? What are some of the challenges you immediately ran into, being like, shit, what have I gotten myself into? How do I wrap my arms around this subject?
Well, it's huge, and the amount of writing, the sheer amount of writing online about Bob and GBV, I mean, just from the 90s, there's just reams and reams and reams of material out there to go through. Initially, I think the biggest challenge was just getting a handle on all of the source material.
Sure.
So there is all that written material. I accumulated somewhere between 50 and 60 hours of audio interviews with various subjects in the book. Bob, and this is just another way that he was so incredibly gracious and helpful in the writing of this book. He has a series of about 16 large, oversized scrapbooks that he's been collecting since Anacrusis,
wow,
the earliest days of GBV, and all the clippings, all the old photographs, his own personal GBV memorabilia collection. And with the help of Rockathon president Matt Davis and Joe Patterson, those guys set up an entire photo station and digitized every page of every scrapbook in a large high-res photo so that I could go in and read things. And so, anyway, the biggest challenge was getting my arms around all of that material and kind of filtering it down into what's important, what are the most important things that need to go in here. And in the end, the deciding factor was really how close is it to Bob?
Sure.
How important is this facet of the story to Bob's life? Because once you have that focus for the book, it really helps to winnow out some other things, some other stories that, might have been really entertaining, but there just wasn't space for them in the book in the end.
So he, you know him fairly casually, you hang out with him, but then once you're interviewing him as a subject, how did you find him in relation to questions about his own life? Was he open? Was he a little elusive here and there? How willing was he to answer, talk about himself?
Well, he wasn't elusive at all, I can say that. There are some stories that, if a story doesn't appear in the final version of the book, it was a conscious decision on Bob's part or on my part or an agreement between us that we just wouldn't include that. But he's really open about his life, and it's another thing about him is that he obviously, I don't know if it's obvious, but he has a lot of pride. He has a lot of pride in himself and in his own work. But at the same time, he's one of the most self-deprecating guys you'll ever meet. He has no problem telling you a story where, it doesn't paint him in the best possible light, but if it's funny, and if it's true, and if it's something that happened, he's willing to share those things, which I think makes for a better, well-rounded book and gives you a better sense of the man and his personality.
Sure. And how wide a net did you cast in terms of talking to people, other people in the band, some of his family members, friends, like just sort of a list of who you spoke to for the project?
Yeah, I'm going to open the acknowledgments page of my book here just to get a look at it here. I wish that I had the time to cast my net farther. Of course, I interviewed Bob and Jimmy, Bob's wife Sarah, all the former band members and current band members that I could get a hold of. We went up to northern Michigan and visited Tobin Sprout.
Wow.
Interviewed him one day. Interviewed Bob and Greg Demos together at Wings. I talked to Kevin Fennell on the phone for about 2.5 hours one day. He was really, really helpful and just a great conversation. Really nice to talk to him. So a huge list of the usual subjects, but I think my favorite person that I tracked down was actually Pete Jameson.
Yeah.
Who's working in, he works, I believe, on an Indian reservation in South Dakota.
Doing what?
Teaching construction engineering. He has a degree in construction engineering from way back. So he's, and I actually spoke to him several times on the phone, probably a total of 5 or 6 hours of interviews with Pete. And he was just great to talk to, knew so much info from the early days. And I think he was happy to kind of be back in the fold a little bit after being on his own for so long.
Yeah, that's really nice. I think he's, up with Robert Griffith and in terms of the guys who really made GBV happen. I think he's one of the key players. And Bob said that. Yeah. He's like, without Jameson, there is no GBV.
Yep. He encouraged him from early on. So that was great. The other thing I wanted to say about a challenge of writing the book was my biggest challenge was to not write a hagiography.
Yeah.
And, if just for our listeners, hagiography being the biography of a saint, I could write that kind of book about Bob, about how he's a genius and I love him and I love everything he does and he's my favorite rock star. But, and this ties into what I was saying earlier, his willingness to tell stories where that don't exactly paint him in the best light. I mean, it made it easy. It made it easy to tell that kind of a well-rounded story and not fall into the trap of, Bob's great, don't say anything bad about Bob.
He's a human. I mean, and humans have their faults. And in fact, one of the things I love about him is he's an ordinary guy, and an ordinary guy is going to have some faults, and that's okay.
Right. He's very down to earth. I mean, he as he says, as far as his music goes, he's gone from the heights of making it sound like everybody in the world can dig it, to all the way down to, the shittiest, staticky, the worst recorded thing you could imagine. But even after all of his rock star days, I mean, he has a swimming pool. That's his his rock star thing. Which is to say, he doesn't act like a rock star like that. That wasn't his goal to go off to Los Angeles and have a big mansion or do any of that. He just wants to be able to do his artistic thing.
Yeah. And so tell me about him and Jim. I think one of the relationship he has with his brother is like really incredible and seems really sweet. Again, you mentioned, I think Oasis earlier, the Gallagher brothers, or like, the Kinks and all these kind of stuff. These like brothers who just can't stand each other. And I think that their relationship is real special. Tell me about the interaction you've seen with them or Jim as a person.
Well, I can tell you they're both, Jim is exactly as comedic and self-deprecating as Bob. He's also willing to tell those kinds of stories and very willing to have them in the book. Uh-huh. Sorry, I'm just recalling the day that I interviewed Bob and Jim together. They're brothers, so they grew up fighting savagely. I mean savagely. All the kind of Indian rope burns and dangling the spit over somebody's face and then sucking it back up. All that torture, and they just tortured the hell out of each other. Mostly Bob torturing Jimmy. But they grew up together. At some point, they became allies. They became each other's biggest supporters. And I think they hadn't hung out for a little while before we did the interview at Wings. But getting the two of them together, the thing that I noticed most was that Bob can bring up a song that I've never heard it before. I've never heard the title. I've never heard these lyrics, and say, hey, Jimmy, remember that song? Remember Jaguar? Remember we used to sing Jaguar? And Jim, oh yeah, Jaguar. And this has been 25 years, and all of a sudden the two of them together in harmony.
Wow.
Well, I'm running down the highway in my new Jaguar. And sang the whole song.
Suitcase 5, maybe.
Or sooner. I hope so.
Okay. Where does Jim live these days? Is he not in Dayton?
Still in Dayton. Still in Dayton. Yeah. And you had said earlier we were talking about the scope of interviews. I spoke to Bob's sister Lisa once
wow.
when she just happened to be at Wings in the afternoon, and I had my recorder there, so I pulled her into the interview and the conversation. And a lot of Bob's friends from high school, and from his younger days, Randy Campbell, Bruce Horner, these guys are still in Dayton, hanging around at Wings on a regular basis. So, it was really easy to have access to those guys and talk to them and just hang out. So.
And how did you find, Mitch and Kevin? You mentioned those guys. How do you think that they're doing these days?
Yeah, I think Kevin seems like he's doing really well. I think I called Kevin a couple times, and then when I finally got in touch with him, he was a little uncertain, whether he wanted to participate. He wasn't sure what the whole deal was or what my deal was. So I talked to him on the phone for about a half hour, and then he said, "All right, we could talk about this for a while. Give me a half hour to prepare, and I'll call you back."
Nice.
I said, "Okay, great, let's do it." Mitch, I never spoke to Mitch in person during the writing of the book, and as I understand, this was the exact same thing that happened with Jim Greer, writing Hunting Accidents, that he wasn't able to get in touch with Mitch until Mitch showed up at the book signing in Dayton, and he was like, "Mitch, where have you been?"
A little late.
Right. So I had Mitch's number. I called him a couple times, but I think Mitch had said something like he was the spirit animal of Jim Greer's book. So he's there in spirit in this book, but I wasn't able to talk to him in person.
Sure.
That was a big regret.
So you mentioned his sister before. What do you get from him these days about his parents? I know there was a lot of damage done. They weren't supportive in the early years. Has that healed over? Is he at peace with that? Is he have a good relationship with them?
It did. His parents actually passed away a couple years ago now.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, his dad passed away, and then his mom not too long after that. I think about 6 months after that. But I know that I don't know, but I believe, and from what I heard, I believe that they reconciled, a great deal before that. I mean, once GBV got to the point of being on David Letterman, Bob could finally point to something that people in Dayton would understand as making it big.
Sure. So in all this research you did, what was something interesting you discovered along the way? Like, and again, you're a hardcore fan. You knew him. What was something that came out of this that you're like, wow, even I didn't know that?
It's hard to focus on one specific thing on the spur of the moment, but I will say that the most interesting things to me were hearing all of the stories of Bob's youth.
Okay.
Hearing and I've felt that way since in Jim Greer's book, there's one sentence near the beginning of it that says that there were probably enough stories from the early days to fill an entire book of its own, and that Bob had said that book would be called Black Ghost Pie. And ever since I read that, I thought, enough stories to fill a book called Black Ghost Pie. I want to hear some of this.
Yeah.
And so as a consequence, in my book, Propeller is about halfway through the book.
Wow.
To give you an idea of the scope of what comes before that. But hearing about that, and the greatest character that came up from Bob's earliest days was their grandfather Friday. Bob and Jimmy both told me about Grandfather Friday, who was kind of a step-grandfather, was married to Bob's grandmother. And they would go visit Grandfather Friday. His real name was Clyde Baxla. They'd go visit him every Friday night, and Jimmy said that they had little shot glasses, and their Grandfather Friday would pour a little bit of beer in the shot glass for him on Friday nights, getting him started early in Dayton. But he was kind of an outlaw. He styled himself a house painter and had a ladder and a bunch of paint cans in the back of his station wagon. But Bob speculates he might have sold a little grass on the side. And he would take Bob and his sister out to the bar when you'd duck out to the watering hole and put Bob up on a table at age 3.
Wow.
And be like, here, put a lamp on him. And Bob would, get up there and start singing Twist and Shout, whatever he got from the radio. But Bob Pollard, age 3, on a bar in Dayton, getting down.
That's amazing. I love it. So you start writing the book. How hard was it to convince a publisher to to publish this? When did you start that process? I mean, he's not quite Springsteen. He's not quite a household name. How did that come about?
Well, I will say, I'll preface this whole thing by saying the ease in which we got a publisher had nothing to do with me and my name. As I was getting close to the point where I had a first draft, actually, it wasn't close to a first draft. It was close to having enough chapters put together that I was comfortable in saying, okay, I can finish this. And Bob's wife, Sarah, forwarded me a message from a literary agent in New York City, Paul Lucas, at Janklow and Nesbitt.
It's a very good agency, by the way.
Yes, I'm very happy with them. They're fantastic representation. And Paul's a cool guy too. So the note was asking Sarah if Bob would ever want to write a memoir.
Wow.
And could he publish Bob's memoir? So I got in touch with Paul Lucas. I called him. I called him when I was on the road. Yeah, I'm old school, so I printed up my cover letter and my sample chapter and put it all in a big manila envelope and mailed it off, hard copy, registered mail, all this stuff, and got a call back saying, I almost just tossed your whole submission in the trash because only really old people and crazy people send things hard copy anymore.
Wow.
So I was like, all right, I better get with the future here. But so we had a meeting, and he was really excited about it. He had been trying to get in touch with Bob to do something for a while. We decided we were going to go ahead and do it. And Paul's first point of contact was actually Ben Schaefer at DeCapo Press. DeCapo being one of the premier publishers of music-related books.
Yeah.
They published the Trouble Boys about the Replacements a few years ago now. And there's just a little bit of negotiation back and forth with Ben at DeCapo, and then we had it. They agreed. They wanted to do it. They seemed excited about it, and we thought, all right, let's do it.
That's perfect. Amazing. Congratulations.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Brings me to the question, how long have you been working on this?
It's about 4 years.
Okay.
About 4 years work put into the book. It was, I'm looking at my poster on the wall here. It was September 12th, 2014 when I pitched it to Bob.
That's not too bad.
That was pretty much the time when the work began in earnest, but I like to say that I started preparing 20 years ago when I got Mag Earwig.
There you go. A lot of research went into that.
Exactly. A lot of 16 years of research followed by 4 years of work and writing.
And can I ask you something real quick about Pollard's wife and his aversion supposedly to technology? Does he really not have an iPhone, a computer? Does everything go through Sarah? That's what I've heard.
He has a flip phone.
Wow.
He does not have a smartphone. He's not on Facebook except, by proxy.
Sure.
Has the Robert Pollard Facebook page and Rockathon and all that. But no, and I'm not sure why. Anything I said about exactly why would be speculating. My suspicion is that he just doesn't have time for that. And that's not really a real thing to him. He's, gets up in the morning and works every day because it's not really work for him. I think it's just how he carries himself and how he lives his life.
Sure. So 4 years ago, you start the book. The book is going to be out almost by the time this conversation goes out there. Any conclusions you came to along the way? Again, you knew him very well, but after looking at his entire life, writing up all this material, do you look at them differently? Anything new that you see with the band?
Two things. In the course of writing the book, after many, many years, Bob and all of his incarnations finally took over the Beatles as my favorite band of all time, because I came to the perspective I gained on what Pollard has created and what he's in the midst of creating. I think that it's going to be several years before we're able to come to terms with the full scope of his legacy in American music. I think there are very few other people, if anyone, who has created that much music over that many years at that level of quality.
Sure. Well,
So,
that's sort of a good segue. So let's talk about GBV and Pollard's body of work. There's just the sheer volume, though, I think sometimes becomes a barrier to entry because you just don't know where to enter the good from the bad. Do you think that's held him back in some regard? People not knowing where to begin?
I think it can hold him back with some people. People are coming at it from the sense of, well, if I like this guy, I'm going to have to get every single thing he's ever done. So, and have that turn them away if it seems like it's too much to undertake. I think it could have that effect with some people, but I think there's also a lot of people who, are just fans of GBV. I was that way for a long time.
Sure.
I had to have a neighbor come over and look at my GBV collection and say, "What? You don't have nearly all the albums." I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, well, there's this solo group, and then there's this, and you need the Circus Devils, and you need all this too. So,
where I am in the podcast is I just did an episode on Let's Go Eat the Factory, which was the reunion tour. Why do you think that Bob kept the band together after the Matador reunion shows and the tour afterwards?
I think that it's important to Bob that if you're going to bring a band back together, it's not a nostalgia show.
Yeah.
And I think that it wasn't enough for him to just bring the band back together for Matador at 21. I think if he was going to do that there, and after that, more tour offers started coming in. So, as I said, I think it was important for him that if they're going to go on tour, they have something new to offer the fans.
Did you get a sense of him being unhappy in the years that they were broken up?
No, I wouldn't say he was unhappy about that. I think, he, it was by his own design that the electrifying conclusion came about in 2004.
Sure.
I don't think it was disappointment so much. I think he's mentioned not really understanding what the difference is between Robert Pollard and Boston Spaceships and Guided by Voices, and why it makes such a big difference what name is on there. But after doing the classic reunion, all those albums, and then by the time he got around to doing Please Be Honest, I think his attitude was just, all right, if you want that band name, fine. But like Marquis Smith says, if it's him and your granny on bongos, it's still the Fall.
It's still the Fall.
I think Pollard with anybody is still GBV if it sounds like that to him.
When I was amazed at how good that run of records was, those reunion ones. Did Bob think that comeback would be so strong?
I don't think anyone ever imagined it was going to be that strong until we heard Let's Go Eat the Factory. I remember hearing, I think, an advanced copy of that and hearing Chocolate Boy and just being, wasn't Fats Domino on that one too, I believe. Yeah, just...
Doing It for a Snowman.
We were just blown away. It struck me as, well, it sounds just like GBV, except it also sounds like little bits of everything Bob has learned and experimented with in the years since then. And he always manages to, if he feels like something works, he manages to synthesize it in there and bring it together and somehow create something new. I mean, it sounded, those records are great to me. I love them. Absolutely love them.
I agree. I think that Bears for Lunch, Class Clown, Sputzy UFO, I think some of their best records ever.
Yep.
And then how about now? Like, this current band is amazing. Space Gun is amazing. August by Cake. I just cannot get over how good this new stuff is versus, I've been around been a music fan for 30 years. I followed a lot of bands for a long time, and no one's been this good for this long.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's unbelievable how good this new lineup is. I've said to Bob a couple times, it's a new golden age of GBV. Yeah. Against all odds, they came back. It's when they got Doug Gillard back in the band, he cemented a lot together. Doug Gillard means a lot.
Yeah, he's amazing. Band. And then how long do you think GBV will last? I mean, will he stop? I think the Fall is a great comparison.
As far as somebody who just doesn't stop.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like I said, it's so hard to separate Bob's life and his work. because
Sure.
for him, they're the same thing. His creative pursuits are his life, and the creative pursuits are his work. I don't see this lineup going anywhere. These guys they get along so well. There's perfect chemistry in the band. I just saw the shows in North Carolina this past weekend, and they all look so happy on stage.
Yeah.
They're all smiling at each other. They're all, I mean, even when things get a little off or a little out of sync every once in a while, they all just look over at each other and, with eye contact, correct whatever was going on and, make something out of it. It's, I'm speechless at how great this new lineup of the band is.
Do you think he'll ever be hemmed in by rock? Like, again, he's not Leonard Cohen. He's not Lou Reed. He can't go arty. He can't wear a fedora and kind of have, chamber music or whatever. Is he going to be like Marky Smith in a fall, like be wheeled out in a wheelchair until he falls over on stage?
I don't know. I don't want to speculate on that. I'm not sure at what point if the inability to do a high kick would be the thing that stops him, or not sure about that. I don't. He's so full of vitality.
Yeah, I mean, some of those solo records are pretty mature. Moses on a Snail gets you to where he could go.
Right. Yeah. You do see that a lot in his music. The contemplation of mortality.
Sure.
How much time we all have left on this earth. And sometimes I do get the sense with the pace that he puts out records is a race against time. Yeah. As it is for all of us.
So what are your plans for the book? You can do some readings, signings. You're going to be at Heat Fest for the paperback?
Definitely going to be at Heat Fest this year. It's going to be in September. We've got 3 readings in the works. I'm not sure if all of them are going to come to fruition, but we're doing 1 reading at the Barrel House in Dayton on the Saturday of Heat Fest this year, which I believe is September 22nd. And then we're trying to pull together a reading at Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C., and another one at Rough Trade, New York City.
Oh, that'd be perfect.
And I may be speaking too soon on those if they don't actually come together by the time this interview comes out. But hopefully all 3 of those are going to come together.
That's awesome. I have to ask you, how is your high kick?
My high kick? Oh, yeah. Completely lame. Completely lame.
As a sort of a final question.
I'm too tall. My center of gravity is too high. If I really went into a high kick, I'd land on my head.
You'll take out the front row.
That's right.
So sort of a final question. What are some of your favorite Pollard or GBV moments and why? Either on record or in live.
Okay. Favorite Pollard moment on record is a song called Poet Bums. That's on We All Got Out of the Army. And on most days, that's my favorite thing that Bob has ever recorded. My favorite live moment is a show from, I think it was 2001 or 2002. It was at the Empty Bottle in Chicago, and he introduced the band as Drunks with Guns. And the stage banter from that, the show is just electric. The band is dead on. I believe the night before they played Universal Truths and Cycles in its entirety, or Isolation Drills in its entirety, and then the second night was more freewheeling affair. I believe that most of the tracks from Relaxation of the Asshole came from that show because the banter was just so good. It's hilarious. It's rocking. It's a great show to track down.
That's awesome. Matthew Cutter, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate it.
That's it for this special bonus episode of Self-Inflicted Aural Nostalgia. I would love to thank Matthew for his time. Go out and get Closer You Are and visit every GBV LP for more episodes.